Good evening, everyone. On behalf of Chairperson Uma Chigurupati and her committee, I, Radhika Agarwal, Honorary Secretary FLO, extend a warm welcome to our esteemed guest, Mr. Christopher Doyle, respected past chairs, members, and guests.
A very good evening and warm welcome to one and all. Secrets, Science, Stories. Reimaging Indian mythology with the best-selling author and CEO coach, Mr. Doyle. I'm very curious whether he is going to unravel any secrets, especially about the weapon from Mahabharata time. Or is he going to leave us to do our own research and imagination? Let's wait and see. I have to share this. While I was reading the Mahabharata secret, I could not bear the suspense. And I skipped many pages to reach the last page and then went back and completed the rest of the story. The story was that gripping and engrossing. Before I conclude, I appreciate Mr. Christopher for the initiative named the Quest Club, which he has started to engage and to encourage readers. At the club, the membership is free, and Mr. Christopher shares his research on science, history, and mythology with the members. It's a very nice initiative, especially at present when the habit of reading is coming down. Congratulations, Mr. Christopher. Thank you for accepting our invitation and being with us today. Can't wait listening to you. Thank you so much.
It's an absolute pleasure to be here today. And I want to thank FLO Hyderabad and Mrs. Chigurupati for the invitation to be here today. And I hope you're going to find this session interesting, to say the least, but I hope it will also raise thoughts and questions in your mind the way my research did when I first embarked on this journey. There's a bit of an echo. Can you reduce that, please? So I write fiction, and at present there are two series running. One is the Mahabharata Quest series, which combines science, history, and mythology, based on the Mahabharata, as the title says, and set in the modern world, so bridging the past and the present. And the second is a Patal Prophecy series, which is more fantasy-oriented, but explores some of the deeper mysteries which can't be explored using science. And I'll be touching upon the research I've done for both of these series today. I write fiction, but today I'm going to give you facts. And I think there might be a little bit of speculation in the middle, and I'll tell you when I'm speculating, because I like to speculate through my books by writing fiction. I do not like to misrepresent facts and say, oh, this is the truth. So I may give you some answers today, I may not give you some answers today. But I hope I'm going to give you food for thought. So one of the facts I want to start by attacking and actually demolishing is this question. I get this asked a lot. Were there actually nuclear weapons in the Mahabharata? You see, Robert Oppenheimer talked about, the I am death, right? And if you Google nuclear weapons in the Mahabharata, you come across this. This is supposed to be a verse from the Mahabharata. Now, a verse in the context of the Mahabharata means a shloka. To start off with, this is not a shloka, because a shloka is a couplet. It's 2 lines of Sanskrit, right? This entire thing cannot be a couplet. So what if these are several couplets taken from a chapter of the Mahabharata? Then it makes sense, right? This whole story. But then, you see the first line and you say Gurkha in the Mahabharata. Strange, isn't it? So let me show you. This is an elaborate hoax which has been propagated in unsuspecting people who've never read the Mahabharata. I've read it twice. And we're working on a project now where I'm reading it a third time. And let me show you where this is taken from. So if you look at the highlighted parts in the red, the content is taken from a book in the Mahabharata called the Mausal Parv. Mausal is club, so it's a book of clubs, right? And this basically talks about the destruction of the Vrishnis and the Andhakas. You know, Gandhari cursed Lord Krishna, and then the whole dynasty got eliminated. And it happened because of this iron bolt. And you can see the match. Unknown weapon, iron thunderbolt, gigantic messenger of death, reduced to ashes the entire race of the Vrishnis and the Andhakas. And you can see over here, we're talking about two different verses, an iron bolt and a huge messenger of death. Pretty accurate, you would say, right? But this is the Mausal Parva. Now, when we come to the last two supposed shlokas of this fake verse, it's from a different chapter in the Mausal Parv, right? And we talk about, hair, nails falling out, pottery breaking. They threw themselves in streams to wash themselves. And there is talk about pottery breaking with no apparent cause, right? But it's a totally different chapter. It's not describing a nuclear weapon. It's describing the Vrishnis and the Andhakas fighting among themselves using this gigantic, and there's a whole story behind it. But I don't want to get into that. I don't have time today. And they weren't bathing themselves in the water to rid themselves of nuclear fallout. Lord Krishna told them to go and bathe in the sacred waters. Right? Big difference. Let's look at the first verse. Now, the word Gurkha is obviously invented. Some Westerner said, India, Mahabharata, Gurkha. Right? Totally inaccurate, of course. And actually, this verse is talking about Mahadev, Lord Shiva. And this is a totally different book of the Mahabharata, the current Parva. And in chapter 34, you can see he's flying a swift and powerful Vimana. Yes, there is a Vimana in the current Parva. Exactly the same words are used. The power of the universe, the energies of the entire universe were united in one place, not in a nuclear weapon, but in the form of Mahadev. Pretty different perspective, right? And then, yes, as bright as 10,000 suns rose in all its splendor. Yes, but it was Mahadev they were talking about, not a nuclear explosion. So I'm sorry to disappoint anybody who thought there were nuclear weapons in the Mahabharata, but they aren't. And these are the facts. You see, most of us, and I, before I started on this journey, even I had not read the Mahabharata. Most of us have not. But when you actually read it, there's a lot there. The Mahabharata says everything is in the Mahabharata. Unfortunately, nuclear weapons are not there. Okay. Sorry? About a nuclear weapon? We're talking about totally different events. We're not talking about an explosion that happened which was described in this way. We're talking about one part of that verse is from the Vrishnis and the Andhakas. Another is a totally different event that happens, which is a story being told about Lord Shiva. If it was all about one event, then one can conceivably, and I'll be telling you some very interesting things today to show what is actually there in the Mahabharata and where the imagination comes in. So yes, you're right, there is imagination, just not here. Not when nuclear weapons are concerned. There are a lot of weapons in the Mahabharata, very powerful weapons, but there are no nuclear weapons, unfortunately. Okay, let's start with some scientific facts, and I'm going to tell you a story now, because I'm a storyteller, right? So I'm going to take you to France in February 1868, Paris. A Parisian concierge enters a small room that is under his care. It's a dark room, squalid, dirty. It's practically bare, just a bed, a table, a coal gas stove, and a corpse, a dead body. And the corpse was what remained of a 29-year-old man whose name was Abel Babet. Now, there was an inquest. The coroner said suicide. And indeed, Abel Babet did commit suicide. But the interesting thing is that it was after the autopsy was done that they realized that Abel Babet had not committed suicide only because he was poor or because he was lonely, his solitude. But there was another big reason, and that reason was an error that happened around 7 months before he was born in approximately April 1838. This error was a mutation which caused a critical enzyme in his body to fail. And this eventually led to his suicide. How do we know this? We know this because when the mother of the future Abel Barber held her child for the first time, she did not hold a boy. It was a 29-year-old man, but she held a baby girl. It's a mystery there. I'll solve it for you towards the end. But first, I want to take you on a tour around the world. So, it's going to be slightly different from your retreat, the history, but let's go. So I'm going to start with Egypt, the Great Pyramid. We are told it was built in approximately 2550 BC by a pharaoh called Khufu, who built it as a tomb for himself. He was supposed to be buried over there. It's 457 feet high. It's a 50-story skyscraper, right? And it's 4,500-year-old 50-story skyscraper. So this guy must have been a grand king. Yeah? The Taj Mahal is just 8 stories. 50 stories. 6 times the height of the Taj Mahal. Interestingly, the actual door of the Great Pyramid was sealed away. You can still see there were blocks, over it, and there are blocks inside it. You can't enter the Great Pyramid using this today. You enter the Great Pyramid today using this hole that was made in approximately 820 AD by the Caliph, whose name was Muhammad al-Mamun. Al-Mamun, we don't know whether he wanted to get in there because he wanted to rob the treasures which would have been there, because pharaohs were buried with a lot of treasure. We don't know whether it was that or whether he had heard about the, knowledge being buried or hidden away in the Great Pyramid. After all, it was hidden away. But anyway, he couldn't find a way in, so being Caliph, he made a way for himself. He built this tunnel, and luckily, by accident, or maybe he knew something, the tunnel was just under the main entrance, so he actually hit the passageways, which I'll show you in just a minute. And this is the tunnel. If you go as a tourist to Egypt today, how many of you have seen the Great Pyramid? Fantastic. So you know what I'm talking about. You actually enter through this tunnel. But Al-Mamun, when he reached inside, the pyramid was empty. No mummy, no treasure, and no inscriptions. No tomb in Egypt is bereft of inscriptions. Those are supposed to take the soul of the dead person to the afterlife. So why would they bury one of their greatest pharaohs in a 50-story tall building without any inscriptions to guide his soul to the afterlife? Instead, what you find is this network of tunnels and 3 chambers: an underground chamber, what is called the Queen's Chamber. It was called by the Arabs in 800 AD, and the King's Chamber, which is where Khufu should have been buried according to archaeologists. And this is a better picture. You can see the passages here. Now, what's interesting over here is, except for this passage over here, which is called a horizontal passage because it's horizontal. It's the only horizontal passage in the entire Great Pyramid. Everything else is at an incline of 26 or 27 degrees, which is about half the incline of the Great Pyramid. The sides of the Great Pyramid is 52 degrees. I could go on forever about that mathematical ratio, but I want to show you some more interesting stuff. So I'm going to start by showing you some pictures, starting with the Grand Gallery, which is circled over here. And this is a picture of the Grand Gallery, and it's extremely steep. This is about 26 degrees, the incline, right? So today you've got these handrails and the wooden slats to help you to climb up as a tourist. But before that, this is how you would have climbed up. Now imagine if this was a tomb, imagine carrying the body of the king up this. You can't carry yourself up it. How are you going to carry a dead body up it? It's very difficult. Very, undignified, right, to do a funeral like this. But yet, we're told it's a tomb. Something more. If you look at the king's chamber, what I've circled is what's called the antechamber. It's a small chamber before the king's chamber. And what's interesting about this is you walk through the Grand Gallery, which is huge in height, and then you have to crawl through this antechamber, as you can see, in order to get into the king's chamber. And this tunnel on the right is how you get into the king's chamber. For those of you who have actually been there and seen it, you know how you have to literally crawl through this to get inside the king's chamber. These photographs are all pretty old. They're taken by the Edgar brothers, who explore the Great Pyramid in the 19th century, late 19th, early 20th century. Let's go to the passage that leads to the Queen's Chamber, the horizontal passage. How do you get into the Queen's Chamber? Again, you have to crawl. And where does this tunnel start? Under the Grand Gallery. Can you see that little hole by the feet of this gentleman, one of the Edgar brothers? That's how you get into the Queen's chamber. So how would you bury a pharaoh in such a monument where you're crawling half the time? And all of these are like this. It's a mystery. What a lot of people don't know about the Great Pyramid is that it does not have 4 sides. It has 8 sides. And this was first discovered in approximately 1926 when a flight, and this is that photograph, took this photograph. This is the Great Pyramid, and you can see the 2 sides. It's concave. There are actually 2 sides on every side of the Great Pyramid. It has 8 sides. And it's only at a time of day when you can see. Here you can just see this line going down here. It's a very, very slight angle. It's like this. Lots of mysteries, no answers. But let's go over to the Sphinx, which is not too far. It's in front of Khafre's pyramid, because the Sphinx, we are told, was built in 2500 BC by Khafre, son of Khufu, and the face of the Sphinx is supposed to be the face of Khafre. Now, for almost all its existence, the Sphinx has been like this, buried in sand up to the shoulders with just the head and the neck visible, right? In 1991, Dr. Robert Schoch, who is a professor of geology at Boston University, his expertise, his PhD was on the erosion of rocks. He was invited to test the theory that the Great Pyramid was built in 2500 BC, because you can't date stone, right? It's millions of years old stone. You can't say when this was built. No stone monument can be dated. So he came and ran some geological tests, and he found something interesting. The horizontal lines you can see on the body of the Sphinx are lines of erosion. Those are marks of erosion. And you can see they're quite different from the face of the Sphinx. The face of the Sphinx is much smoother. That's also eroded. And if you look at the sides of the walls surrounding the Sphinx, there's a lot of erosion over there also, right? All these channels and fissures. And here's a close-up, which, can you all see, is the table blocking your view? No? Okay. So Robert Schoch ran his tests, and he said, look, on the basis of science, all I can say is that these channels, these marks of erosion were not caused by wind or by sand blown by wind, as you would imagine in Egypt, but they were caused by heavy rainfall. And that's a problem, because it hasn't rained in Egypt for thousands of years. The last time it did rain heavily enough to cause this kind of erosion would have been in what's called the Neolithic subpluvial, which was a 3,000-year period between 8,000 and 5,000 BC. So the Sphinx couldn't possibly have been built in 2,500 BC, because it could not have been eroded by rainfall. It hasn't rained then. Again, we don't know who built the Sphinx then. It wasn't Khafre, but who was it? I'm now taking you to Lebanon, a place called Baalbek. This is one of my favorite archaeological sites. You can go there now. A few years ago, it was dangerous because you had a lot of machine gun fire in the background while you were visiting the site. But it's beautiful. This is the wall of the Temple of Jupiter. And there's a controversy about this, because some people say it was built 2,000 years ago by the Romans. Other people say it was built much before that, thousands of years before, but they don't know who built it, right? This is a moot point, and I'll tell you why. It doesn't really matter who built it. Because if you look at these 3 stones, and you can see the 3 stones over here, and you can see the comparison of 2 fully grown men. It tells you how big these stones are, right? And this is also a man over here in the bottom left corner. I'm talking about these 3 stones over here. And they're outlined in this picture, so you can see what I'm talking about. Now, why am I talking about these stones? Because these stones have been lifted to a height of about 20 feet and put on top of the wall. You can see that. And then on top of that, you can see smaller stones which have been put there by the Romans and the Arabs as they came in, the wall of the Temple of Jupiter. These 3 stones, each of them weighs 840 tons. Right? This big stuff, right? Now, the problem is that in the 21st century, when we lift heavy things, this is actually possibly the largest crane in the world, and it has a capacity of 825 tons. So in the 21st century, we wouldn't be able to lift those stones and put them on the wall. So it doesn't matter whether it was 2,000 years ago or 10,000 years ago. People then did not have the technology to do this. Yet someone has done it, right? Someone has put these stones there. They didn't land up on their own. And if you go to the quarry, this is another shot of the crane. If you go to the quarry where the stones came from, you'll find this huge stone. It's called the Stone of the Pregnant Woman. I don't know why. It's a translation from Arabic. I have no idea why. But this is actually what it's called. I'm not joking. It weighs 1,150 tons. So the joke is that they couldn't lift this, so they left it there. But most probably because it's cracked, so they didn't use it for building. And just a few years ago, just next to this stone of the pregnant woman, they found in the ground another stone. You can see it's been cut, it hasn't been taken out. This one weighs 1,650 tons. No wonder they left it in the ground. But then who was building all this, these kind of monuments so many years ago? Last stop, Stonehenge. Again, one of my favorite sites. How many of you have seen Stonehenge? Okay, fantastic. How many of you have seen it from inside? You have? Okay, great. So, so this is Stonehenge, and these stones weigh 40 to 70 tons, the standing stones and the stones on top. And this is a picture of my daughter, just to show you how big these stones are. But I've also got a short video which I show to very few people, but this is from inside Stonehenge. Okay. See the size of the stones. See the height. It's taken from ground level. These are massive stones which have been put there. Right, so they're about 15, 20 feet in height, and then we've got these 40 to 70 ton stones right on top also. So everyone talks about the mystery of Stonehenge being who built it and why. But for me, what's more fascinating is how. How did they build this? Because I spent a week in 2015 when I was researching the secret of the Druids. I spent a week with two archaeologists. And after some time, they told me to shut up and stop asking questions because I was saying, how did they build it and stuff like that. They gave me explanations, but I didn't buy it. And you can see now why, now that I've shown you close-ups of this. So the archaeologists said that each stone was lifted by about 100 men pulling with ropes, pulling these 70-ton stones, 100 men, and placing it on top. But then look at the engineering behind it. Each of the standing stones has these two projections, which are called tenons. And correspondingly, you have mortise holes which fit on top of the tenons, kind of like a Lego set, right? So there's a lock. Not only that, there's a side lock, because if you look at the side, there's what's called a tongue and groove joint. These are carpentry joints. And the Stonehenge people were applying it to stone, and not to small stone, but huge blocks of stone. The tongue and groove joint works like a jigsaw. So they were very smart, right? To prevent these huge stones from falling, they had a lock at the bottom of the stone, as well as at the side. But this is how did they do it? Because even if you had 100 men picking up a block of stone, you see how high it was. You can't see what's happening up there. How do you fit both of these together? Just think about it. How do you place one stone, the next stone, how do you make sure both the locks fit when you can't see what you're doing? It's like, if you wanted to replicate it, close your eyes and try and assemble a Lego set. That's how easy it is, because they couldn't see what they were doing. And you see these close-ups, you can see the mortise holes very clearly. Here you can see a tenon very clearly. Here you can see the outline of a tongue at the side of the stone. So it's all there. 2400 BC, 4,400 years ago. How did they do it? And that's when the archaeologists told me, they said, we're not engineers, we're archaeologists. We've answered all your questions. So it's a mystery. What's even more interesting, and this could be a pure coincidence, but for an author of fiction who likes mysteries, I love these kind of things. I've shown you Baalbek and I've shown you Stonehenge. Now this photograph is a little distorted, but it'll still serve my purpose. If you draw this diagonal, and this is a Google Earth, this has not been Photoshopped, this is a Google Earth picture, you can do it yourself. If you draw one diagonal, because the base is a square of the Great Pyramid, it points towards Baalbek, the temple of Jupiter that I just showed you. And if you draw another diagonal to the left, it points to Stonehenge. Coincidence, probably. But amazing coincidence, isn't it, that two of these ancient monuments, and the third ancient monument, the Great Pyramid, and the pyramid and Stonehenge supposedly were built around the same time, approximately 4,400 to 500 years ago. Now, in the mid-1990s, two books, I was reading a lot, two books stood out, and these are the two books. which tried to explain a lot of these mysteries, a lot of these monuments around the world. And their explanation was quite simple. I will summarize their theory in 3 lines. They basically said all these monuments, and I've just given you a handful, right? There are hundreds of these all over the world, including stone circles in India, which I haven't talked about, but maybe another day. They basically said that all of these were built by an ancient global civilization spread out throughout the world, thousands of years ago. They had advanced science and technology, but where are they today? Because it's not us, right? It's someone else. And they said that they were destroyed by a global flood that happened approximately 12,000 years ago. Now, I'm not here to either prove or disprove this. I found it fascinating in the mid-1990s. There was absolutely no scientific evidence at that point in time. But there have been new discoveries in the last 15 or 20 years, and I want to share just 3 of these with you today, very quickly. The first is, we now know based on science that in approximately 10,800 BC, approximately 12,000 years ago, an extraterrestrial body hit the Earth. Comet, meteor, asteroid, we don't know what, but something. So I'm going to call it a comet to make it simple, right? So the comet hit the Earth, broke up into fragments, and struck the Earth at different places. Today we call this the Younger Dryas event. YDB stands for the Younger Dryas boundary. Now, 12,000 years ago, the Ice Age was melting. It started, the Ice Age was ending, the ice was melting. It started ending 15,000 years ago. But still there was a very thick ice cap, kilometers deep at places, covering most of North America and Canada. So all of that up there, up north, was one sheet of ice. There was no sea over there. The whole of Europe and the UK was one sheet of ice. So a lot of the fragments struck ice, thick ice, and 2 things happened. The first thing that happened was, because of the impact and the heat generated, the ice cap melted, sea levels rose by hundreds of feet, and caused a global flood. So we now know that 2,000 years ago there was a global flood. There is scientific evidence for that. The second thing that happened because of this was that the sheer impact, I mean, each impact was like a couple of hundred nuclear bombs going off, you know. So it was like thousands of Hiroshimas all over the world. The planet shook. There were volcanic eruptions, there were earthquakes, there was a lot of dust and debris that got thrown up into the atmosphere. The sun got blacked out for 1,300 years, causing an artificial winter, which is today called the impact winter. Do we have scientific evidence for this? Yes, we do. Here's a report from an ice core sample from Greenland. So you know what geologists do? They drill kilometers deep, take out ice cores, test them to find out what was happening in the Earth's atmosphere thousands of years ago. And if you look at the red line, you can see it starts off at about minus 45 approximately. Then it goes up 15,000 years ago. Temperature goes up to minus 30. The ice age has begun to end, right? Global warming is happening on its own. And then you see there's a drop. And the drop hits minus 50. So it now becomes colder than the ice age. This is not a natural phenomenon. This is when the comet hit the Earth. And then for 1,300 years, the temperature stays. The Earth stayed colder than it ever was before the ice age. And 1,300 years, that's the impact winter. And then when the dust settles, the sun comes out again, the planet heats up, temperatures go up to minus 30, and that's where they are today. So there's scientific evidence for this. The second discovery I want to share with you, and this is surprising because this was discovered in 1994. And there is no mention about this anywhere. I'm really, really surprised. Very few people know about this. Turkey, Göbekli Tepe. You can see the stone circles. The only difference is Stonehenge had rough stones, and these are carved. They're carved and almost polished, and they have carvings on them. They have carvings of animals which never lived there. They are all aligned to different constellations: Orion, Cygnus, the zodiac, the constellations of the zodiac. There are amazing alignments over here. And what's interesting is that this is one archaeological site which no one disputes when it was built. Scientific testing has shown it was built approximately 9,500 to 10,000 BC, and everyone accepts it. Everyone agrees. It was built there. No disputes, unlike the Sphinx or the Great Pyramid or any of these, or the Temple of Jupiter, right? So everyone accepts that almost 12,000 years ago, there were civilized people building this. Why do I say civilized? Because you have to have knowledge of astronomy and engineering to build this. It's not easy to just put stones, which align to a constellation. You need scientific knowledge. So traditionally, we've been told that human civilization started with Sumeria, Indus Valley, Egypt, about 4,000 to 6,000 years ago. But now we know that civilization has been pushed back to 10,000 BC, shortly after this comet strike. Reimagining, or actually rethinking our notions of the past. The third discovery. This is a photograph of archaeologists digging in a cave in Russia called Denisova. And they found a couple of things. They found a bone of a finger. We've got these little fingers, so they found one of those bones. And they found a tooth. Now, this was a huge tooth. It's about 2.5 times the surface area, is 2.5 times the size of our teeth. So they thought this probably belongs to some large extinct animal, an ancient bear or something, and they sent it for genetic testing. Imagine their shock when the DNA test results came back saying that this is a human tooth. It belongs to a girl who lived 40 to 50,000 years ago. It's a human tooth that's 2.5 times the size of our teeth, right? So in 2009, when this discovery was made, we realized that there was a human species, which is today called Denisovans. I forget the Latin name. It's something Denisova, but they're popularly known as the Denisovans. And what's interesting is we've slowly, after this discovery, more and more fragments have been found about Denisovans, but no complete skeleton has been found. So there's speculation. Now, this is not a fact. The rest of it is fact, but it is speculated based on the size of the bones and the size of the teeth that have been discovered that they were large people, possibly 9 to 11 feet in height. Right? That's how they had huge bones, big teeth. And they lived till they disappeared about 40,000 years ago. Who were they? We don't know, but hopefully we will find more information about them. But this artifact is interesting. It was probably worn by this girl whose tooth was found, because it was found along with the teeth. So this artifact is probably around 40. I'm saying probably because you can't date it. It's a stone bracelet. And what's interesting is the little hole at the side. Now, why is it interesting? Because scientists decided, it is man-made. So scientists decided they wanted to find out how this hole was made in the bracelet, because its diameter is just 1 millimeter. So they made this hole in the stone, 1 millimeter in diameter in the stone. So they wanted to find out why. And now I'm going to quote from the scientific report. Right? It's available. No, I think you'll have to buy it because I bought it. But if you go to the Quest Club, I've got stuff on this. So here's the quote from the scientists, because if I say it, then you'll laugh at me. But these are scientists saying this, right? So they say that this hole could only have been made using a 2-faced drill operating at very high speeds. And then they go on to say that this technology should not have been possible 40,000 in 40,000 BC. It should have been. It came much, much, much later. It's not like our drills today. So I'm not saying that these are these Black & Decker drills which you plug in and. But it was a technology which actually came thousands of years later. But it seems the Denisovans did have this technology. And recently, with all the fragments that are being found, scientists have reconstructed the face of Denisovans. And this is what they may have looked like. Yeah, and a bit scary, if they were 11 feet tall. Imagine meeting this guy in a dark alley. Let's come back to India now. So, after looking at all of these things and reading all of this, I started wondering about India. And this is based on facts, right? Because a lot of people like to talk about science in India, unfortunately, without facts. So everything I'm going to tell you is fact-based, and I'll tell you when I'm speculating. So I'm going to tell you, there's a lot I could talk about. I've done sessions like this which have lasted for 6 to 8 hours in breaks, not at once, a stretch, of course. But so there's a lot you can talk about science in ancient India. I'll give you a glimpse today. So in Vedic times, people worshipped using altars. If you read the Rig Veda, it's altars. No mention of temples. I don't know. I'm not saying there were no temples at that time. A lot of people say there were no temples. It was just altars. But the Rig Veda only talks about altars. And the Shulba Sutras, which were the guide to rituals, they actually had very, very detailed descriptions of how to build these altars. So this is a modern construction based on the Shulba Sutras. And here you can see that there were 5 layers. You can see the 5 layers. There are 5 levels of bricks. Each altar was made out of 1,000 bricks in 5 layers. And this particular, they were in different designs. There were circles, squares. This is an eagle or a falcon. And this is a diagram from the Shulba Sutras based on what's given over there. And you can see there are 4 different shapes. And when you consider that the Shulba Sutras were written somewhere between 600 and 800 BC, it's pretty obvious that geometry was known at that time. You can't convert this sheet of paper into an altar without knowing geometry. It's just not possible. You have to know. So they did have knowledge of geometry 2,500, almost 3,000 years ago. What's interesting is, here's another example of geometry. This is from the Bodhyana Shulba Sutra, which is dated to about 800 BC. And this is Pythagoras' theorem 300 years before Pythagoras. This is exactly the same thing. The difference is, it's not mathematically expressed. It's expressed in a more subjective way, but this is exactly what it's saying. What the Greeks did, the Greeks, everything, the science that they came up with was all mathematical, but all the science you find in our ancient texts are like this. There's no mathematics involved until you have the Aryabhats and all the Renaissance of science, which happened about 500 AD onwards. The Shulba Sutras also give you the square root of 2, and this is the value in the Shulba Sutras. 1.414215. What's the modern value? So far, so good. So they were off by 1 decimal place, but they were right to 5 decimal places. Not bad, right, for something that was 2,500 years ago. So we were not that primitive, right? And then there's this text called the Sushruta Samhita. Sushruta was a surgeon. He operated somewhere between approximately 600 BC, almost 3,000 years ago. And it's a very detailed, very boring text, to be very honest. He describes all kinds of surgical procedures. But one of the things which he talks about is plastic surgery technique still being practiced in the 20th and 21st century. It's called Rhinoplasty. That's what we call it today, where you cut a patch of skin from the forehead and use it to reconstruct the nose and the lips. So it's reconstruction surgery. And it's exactly the same technique. Now again, it's not just me saying this, but if you go to Columbia University's website, they talk about it as well. It's an actual fact, and it's there in the Sushruta Samhita. Let's get into a bit of speculation now. Speculation is always fun, but we're going to speculate on the basis of science. Okay? This is not going to be in the air speculation. So let's talk about sonic levitation. Now, in the laboratory today, this is the apparatus that scientists use to suspend solid objects in midair using only sound, just the power of sound, right? And most of you would never have heard of this American inventor called John Keely. Has anyone heard of him? I'm not surprised. So John Keely said he had discovered how to harness the power of sound to do a lot of things, to lift heavy objects, to run engines. He wanted to develop the world's first motor car that ran on sound. In those days, we had electric cars. The first cars were electric, right? Then they changed to petrol. So he wanted to develop cars, and he started something called the Keely Motor Car Company, where he said, I will use my science for this. And if you read Keely's books, they're pretty technical at times, and he's very, very vague about certain things because he didn't want to let his secrets out. He talks about the machines, the tests, and there are lots of newspaper articles about John Keely because people used to go to his lab and see how the sound, how his machines worked to do things. He could lift heavy objects just using sound waves. And here are some photographs of John Keely and his machines. No one ever knew how he did it. What was also very interesting was that somehow the machines were tuned to individuals. So if I went there and operated the machine, and then you were to go there, the machine would have to be retuned for you. Otherwise, you would not be able to operate it. It's very interesting because there was some sort of a connection which he was making between individuals, sound fields, and sound waves. We don't know what. So, but this is what has been described. And these are some of his machines. The problem was that John Keeley refused to divulge his secrets. And so the investors who were backing him, they said, look, how are you going to build motor cars if you don't tell us how it's working? And he said, no, until it's perfect, I'm not going to divulge. And they pulled out, and there was a lot of politics also happening around that time. And he died in poverty, and he took his secrets to the grave. But had he hit upon something? And this is where I'm going to speculate. This is all science. Now I'm going to start speculating. Because when you read the epics like the Mahabharata, there's a lot of use of sound there, isn't there? Every single celestial weapon, every astra that is given by the devs to the human beings are operated using mantras. Isn't it? In fact, there's a very embarrassing episode of Arjun after the Kurukshetra war when he's escorting the Vrishni women and children. Right? Lord Krishna has tasked him with that responsibility. And here's this hero from the Mahabharata, right? Undefeatable. The guy who could defeat, in the Virat Parv, he defeats the entire Kaurav army by himself when he's in disguise. Right? He's disguised as a eunuch and he defeats them. And he's escorting these, and then you have these common bandits who come and they defeat Arjun. Very embarrassing. They take away half the women and children. Arjun cannot command the celestial weapons because he has forgotten the mantra. He was cursed. Right? So he forgets the mantra and he cannot use his weapons. I'm speculating. But was there something about sound there? Let's look at some more quotations. And a lot of these from the Srimad Bhagavatam. There's a lot of talk about innumerable universes. And I've just highlighted them. Here's another one from the Srimad Bhagavatam. Innumerable universes. Unlimited universes. Innumerable universes. This is the Brahma Samhita. And again, all the universes clustered together appear like atoms in a huge combination. What's very interesting is that today, if you read modern physics, there's a lot of talk about the multiverse, parallel universes, each one obeying its own laws of physics. And these universes will never meet, but they're supposed to be there. And this is part of modern quantum theory. Could this be, again, in our ancient texts, there was no mathematics. Today, these are all mathematical models. The multiverse is a mathematical model. You can't prove it because you can never see another universe. But mathematically, it's been proven that there are multiple universes. Is it possible that there was some knowledge in those days? Don't have an answer. But what's very interesting is that there are so many millions of ancient texts which have not been translated. David Pingree, an American mathematician, estimated that there are 30 million ancient manuscripts in India, and more than 97% of these have not been translated, either because we can't read them anymore, we've forgotten the language, we don't have enough scholars, not enough time with the handful of scholars we have to actually read these, and they're all over the country, these manuscripts. What's in them? We don't know. What knowledge could be there which we can't access, we just don't know. So I come back now to France in February 1868. The story of Abel Bame, who was born a girl and died a man. And there's a scientific reason for this. So the scientific reason is, I'm not going to get technical about the science, so I'm going to put it very, very simply. Basically, Abel Bame is what is medically known as a male pseudo-hermaphrodite. And people with this medical condition are born female, and around the age of puberty, their sex automatically changes to male. It's natural. It's perfectly natural. How does this happen? It happens because an enzyme, like I said, that enzyme failed. A mutation, a genetic mutation causes an enzyme called 5-alpha reductase to disappear. It's not produced by the body. And when that happens, you have male pseudo-hermaphrodites. There are well-documented cases of this in modern medical history all over the world. It's a rare condition, but it's very, very well documented. Abel Barbe is one of the more famous. If you Google Abel Barbe, now that you know about him, you will find this. So, science and the Mahabharata. I love looking for these links. And some of you may have guessed where I'm going with this story. So, in the Mahabharata, we have a story about King Drupad. He wants a son, but he gets a daughter. What does he do? He goes and complains to Lord Shiva, right? He goes and says, Lord Shiva, you promised me a son, and I've got a daughter. And what does Lord Shiva say? Lord Shiva says, don't worry. Your daughter will become a son. It's there in the Mahabharata. And what happens? So Drupad goes back saying, it's a son. It's not a daughter. She may look like a girl, but she's not a girl. She's a guy. Lord Shiva has said so, right? This is what the story says. So strongly does he believe in this fact that he marries her off. And when Shikandan's wife comes home, she discovers that she's been married to a girl. And Shikandan's father-in-law is extremely upset. And he sets off with his army towards King Drupad's kingdom to take revenge. You fooled me. You married my daughter to your daughter. What kind of prank is this? So Shikandan is understandably very upset. She's distressed. And she leaves the palace. And this is all the story from the Mahabharata. So she leaves the palace and she goes into the forest where she meets a yaksha. And this yaksha, called Sthuna, asks her, why are you looking so sad? And she says, well, this is what the story is. Tells the whole sob story. And then Sthuna is a kind yaksha. So he says, I've got an idea. I'll lend you my masculinity. Go back as a male. Convince your father-in-law that you are actually a man. So your father-in-law will go back with his army. And then you come back and we'll swap again. Yeah, it's like borrowing a book. Huh? How cool is that? But Sthuna does this. So Shikandan jumps at this opportunity because she says, there will not be a war, right? And Shikandan leaves the forest as Shikandi. And Shikandi goes back, and his father-in-law is very happy and says, oh, I'm sorry, I made a mistake. He goes back. But what happens is Sthuna gets cursed by Kuber, because Kuber says, you did something that is unnatural. You interfered with nature. She's a girl. How did you make her a man? And because of that mistake, Sthuna is cursed by Kuber to stay female forever. He says, you've given your masculinity, you've lost it. You should not have done it. Now, Shikandi will stay a man and you will stay a woman for the rest of your lives. And that's how Shikandi becomes such an instrumental character in the Kurukshetra war. It could not have been won if Shikandi had not been there, right? Because Bhishma could not have been killed. And it's interesting, this pivotal moment is captured in the story. And a lot of people have tried to explain this by saying that Shikandi was a transgender. The problem with this is not based in science. And I'll tell you why. Because transgenders cannot have children. Naturally. They can adopt, but they can't have children of their own. But Shikandi had a son. Not adopted. The Mahabharata is very clear about that. Right? His own natural son. So clearly, he was not infertile. Right? The only other explanation for this is based in science, is that he was a male pseudo-hermaphrodite. Born a girl, turned a man. And if you look at it, again, I'm not saying that this is the absolute truth. I'm just saying this is the only scientific explanation I can think of. If you think about it, thousands of years ago, you have this major event where a princess suddenly becomes a prince. Today, when you have so much inequality and you've got so much discrimination, imagine thousands of years ago, if this happened, what a social scandal that must have been. So what do? King Drupad says, Lord Shiva said, right? Everyone shuts up then, right? This is divine. Lord Shiva said the girl will become a boy. End of story. No one's going to, there's no social scandal anymore. Then everyone says, okay. Lord Shiva said, tab to theek hai. And could this be possible? It could be possible, right? And this is what I like to speculate about. Okay, one last bit, and this is again science, is there was a bootleg fire earlier this year. You must have heard about it in Oregon. And what was interesting about the bootleg fire was that it started generating its own weather. It became so fierce that you had these kind of headlines. It started generating its own fire clouds, its own rain, its own thunder and lightning. It started creating its own weather. And this happens, there's again science behind this. This happens when you have two types of clouds. One are called the Pyrocumulus Clouds, which are, I think this is, Pyrocumulus is Latin for, flame. They're born out of flame. And you also have something called Pyrocumulonimbus Clouds. And NASA calls these the fire-breathing dragon of clouds. These are huge clouds, and I'll show you photographs just now. The Pyrocumulonimbus Clouds can self-generate lightning and thunder and rainfall. And this is a Pyrocumulus cloud, and this is a Pyrocumulonimbus cloud. Now this is how it works. You've got smoke, it cools, the cloud forms, and then the clouds start generating rain and lightning on their own. And some of you may have guessed where I'm going with this story, right? So again from the Mahabharata, if we look at some shlokas, I'm going to show you some shlokas and quickly translate them for you as well. I'm not going to read them out, but I'll show you. Now, the burning forest, blazing with the rays of the sun falling on it. Here's another one. This is all from the Adi Parva. The great flame of the blazing fire rose to the sky. It could be talking about the bootleg. And there's more. Vasa, Indra, covered the sky with masses of clouds of various kinds, and he then began to pour rain. We were talking about imagination a while ago. Those hundreds and thousands of clouds began to shower on the Khandav forest in drops as thick as the flagstaffs of war chariots. The slayer of Namuchi, that's Indra, becoming very angry with Agni, collected many more masses of clouds and made them shower a heavy downpour. It's the clouds that are generating their own rain and their own lightning. And then this one is very telling. The flames fought with that heavy shower and those masses of clouds overhead. Smoke and lightning. The forest was filled with smoke and lightning and became fearful to look at. These are exactly the words that firefighters in Oregon were using to describe the bootleg fire. They said it was terrifying. It was almost, they almost talked about the flames and the rain and stuff like that. And that's the thought I want to leave you with today. What if? What if there is, there is science behind a lot of what we read? We just have to look for it and find the associations based on scientific facts, of course, not on pure imagination. So a lot of imagination could have been used. The Khandav forest, for example, is a very good example of imagining. They imagine a battle between Indra coming and doing all of this. But what if it was a huge forest fire with Pyrocumulonimbus clouds generating their own thunder and lightning, and you use that to say, okay, that's Indra actually throwing lightning around. And this is what I basically explore in my books. And I just want to end quickly by talking about two things. One is the Quest Lab. And since you've spoken already about the Quest Lab, I won't talk too much about it. But if you're interested in this kind of stuff, please do join. It's free. And there's a lot of interesting stuff. I keep posting over there as and when I get time, because I have a day job and I write. And then I do like to share this. But it's a place where we have some interesting discussions as well. And we do virtual meetings. We do in-person meetings. For 2 years, we haven't been doing in-person meetings. But we do have these interactions where people, we come in and discuss a lot of things. And the final thing I want to talk to you about, just tell you, and you're probably the first to know about this, but this is a project which I've been thinking about for a long time. So I'm very curious about you. How many of you would really like to read the Mahabharata but don't know where to start or think it's too complicated? Yeah, thank you. I get a lot of this from readers. So I'm coming out with a video series which which is actually going to explore the Mahabharata the way I just described to you. So it's not a translation of the Mahabharata. You can pick this up in the market. This is a real exploration of it. Examines things like, Daksh Prajapati is described as being created by Brahma. That's one. He was born from the thumb of Brahma. But then in the Vishnu Puran, it says he was the son of the 10 Prachetas. How could he be both? So, and there's there in the Mahabharata also. I go into a lot of depth and try and explain a lot of these things, connect all the ancient texts and try and put it together. Because a lot of people, if you were just to read the Mahabharata by itself, it can get a little yes. It's very difficult to go through it on your own. So I'm just putting this, I just wanted to inform you about this since I'm here. There will be an announcement probably in December. I'll be launching this video series, and it will be available for those who are interested in exploring the Mahabharata, not just reading a retelling or a translation of the Mahabharata. And that's it from me today. Thank you very much. You've been an amazing audience. I hope you liked the session.
Thank you so much, Mr. Christopher Doyle. You've made us travel deep into the layers of history which were unknown to us. We thank you for adorning the occasion and leaving us intriguingly enlightened. We have a lot to go back, to introspect, to research, and to discuss. We express our gratitude to our platinum sponsors, Greenco, gold sponsors, Granules India, and branding partner, RBC, for their continuous support. We thank the team of Taj Deccan for the excellent service, and the members of press for their stupendous coverage of our events, and our complete team of 2122 for a resolute support in making this program a success. We thank all our members and past chairs in making this a bright afternoon. Thank you. Stay safe.